23 feet. That is how wide the pavement gets at the narrowest point of U.S. Route 550 in southwestern Colorado, on a stretch locals have called the $1,000,000 Highway for more than a century. 23 feet, with a rock wall pressing in on one side and nothing but open air on the other, because for most of its most exposed miles, this road has no guardrail at all. Not a low one. Not a broken one. None. That absence is not an oversight. It is a design decision, made over 100 years ago and never reversed. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why removing that one piece of steel might be the thing that has kept people alive. You will also understand why, on average, this short stretch of American highway is associated with roughly 7 deaths a year. Your headlights on a night like that reach maybe 300 feet ahead of you. The curve waiting beyond them turns tighter than that. This is the story of the road between Ouray and Silverton, Colorado, and why it is far more dangerous than the postcards suggest. Before we go further into the switchbacks, I want to ask you something, because I ask everyone who ends up here. Where are you watching this from tonight? And have you ever driven a road like this one? A road where the shoulder simply stops existing? Type it in the comments when we get there. I read every one of them. And if roads like this one keep you up thinking the way they keep me up researching them, this channel exists for exactly that feeling. So consider subscribing before the next mile marker, because we are only getting started. Now, back to the mountain. The section of US 550 known as the $1,000,000 Highway runs roughly 20 to 25 miles between the towns of Ouray and Silverton, climbing up and over Red Mountain Pass, which crests at 11,018 feet above sea level. That makes it one of the highest paved passes in the state of Colorado, and one of the steepest, with grades reaching 8% on the switchbacks facing Ouray. The road did not begin as a highway. It began as a toll road, carved into the mountainside starting in 1882 by a man named Otto Mears, a former gold miner and Civil War veteran who had discovered he had a talent for building roads through terrain that seemed to actively refuse them. Mears had spent years earning a living exactly this way, buying into struggling toll charters and pushing crude wagon roads through the San Juan Mountains, charging a passage fee to anyone who wanted to cross. In 1883, Ouray County commissioned him to link the town of Ouray to the mining settlement of Ironton, and his crews completed that stretch before Thanksgiving of that year. A year later, San Juan County commissioned him to build the other half, from the top of Red Mountain Pass down into Silverton. His crews finished connecting the two sides in November of 1884. At a cost that, in some sections, ran to roughly $10,000 a mile, a staggering sum for the era, when an ordinary laborer might earn less than $2 a day. Nobody knows for certain where the name $1,000,000 Highway actually came from. One story claims the roadbed itself was packed with tailings containing $1,000,000 in low-grade gold and silver ore. Another claims an exhausted traveler simply swore he would not drive it again for $1,000,000. A third insists it refers to the sheer cost and difficulty of blasting the route into existence at all. Historians still disagree. Either way, the name outlived the argument, and Mears originally charged wagon drivers around $5 a crossing, a fee locals resented enough that the state took ownership of the road in 1887. Mears built this road because the towns needed it, not because anyone wanted a scenic drive. Silverton and Ouray sat on opposite sides of the Red Mountain Mining District, a corridor thick with silver claims like the Yankee Girl and the National Bell, and ore had to move to survive as an economy. So Mears blasted a shelf into the near vertical quartzite cliffs above Red Mountain Creek and the Uncompahgre River. A shelf just wide enough for a wagon, hundreds of feet above the water below. One of his more remarkable feats survives largely intact today. A 200-foot tunnel, 17 feet wide, carved through solid rock near Ouray, engineered well enough that its basic structure has never needed to be replaced. In 1910, a Ford Model T became the first automobile to descend the pass toward Ouray, carrying a local doctor and several companions on a house call to the mining camp of Ironton. The trip made local headlines at the time. People genuinely doubted an automobile could survive the crossing. The round trip that once took wagon drivers most of a day now takes a car under an hour. In 1924, Colorado's Highway Department absorbed and improved Mears's original toll road, folding it into the newly designated US 550. And through the 1930s, the state gradually widened and graded sections of it for automobile traffic, adding better snow-clearing equipment along the way. But here is the detail that matters most for understanding why people still die on this road today. The route Mears blasted into that cliff face was never built with a modern shoulder in mind, and above a landmark called Bear Creek Falls, modern US 550 still follows his original ledge almost exactly. You are driving, in places, on a road engineered for horse-drawn wagons in the 1880s, only paved over, painted with lane lines, and given a speed limit. Drive it today, and the road announces its history at almost every turn. Heading north out of Ouray, you pass beneath Box Canyon Falls before the highway begins its true climb. And a few miles later, you reach an overlook locals still call Switzerland of America, a pullout carved into the cliffs specifically so tourists can stop safely instead of craning their necks mid-curve. The route then threads past Bear Creek Falls, follows Mears's original shelf for a stretch, and continues up through a series of steep grades and hairpin turns before dropping toward Silverton on the far side. It is a genuinely beautiful drive, part of the larger San Juan Skyway Scenic Byway that loops for over 200 miles through this corner of Colorado. And that beauty is precisely what makes it so easy to underestimate. The same curves that photograph so well from a pullout look very different from the driver's seat, with a sightline that often reveals a blind hairpin only after you are already committed to it. That brings us to the guardrails, or the near-total lack of them. Along many of the highway's most exposed sections, there is simply nothing between your tires and a drop of hundreds of feet. This is not because Colorado's transportation department has never gotten around to installing them. It is because, in winter, this road doubles as a snowshoot. The corridor receives an average of more than 300 inches of snowfall a year. And the only realistic place for that snow to go, once plows scrape it off the driving lanes, is over the edge. A continuous guardrail would trap that snow against the roadway instead of letting it slide off the shelf, burying the highway faster than crews could ever clear it. So for 100 years, the trade-off has been made deliberately in favor of keeping the road passable through winter rather than keeping a steel rail between drivers and the canyon. It is a rational engineering decision built entirely around snow removal. And it is also the single detail that makes the summer views along this highway so uninterrupted and the summer mistakes so unforgiving. A driver who drifts wide on a blind curve in July finds exactly the same nothing waiting for them that a plow driver relies on in January. Winter, though, is where this highway earns its darker reputation. The corridor between Ouray and Silverton sits beneath nearly 100 named avalanche paths, on a route the Colorado Avalanche Information Center has described as among the most avalanche-exposed stretches of highway anywhere in the lower 48 states. One writer who has driven it repeatedly recalled a single night when more than 60 avalanches crossed a 5-mile stretch of this highway, burying the town of Ouray under 4 sudden feet of snow. The most notorious of these slide paths is called the East Riverside Slide, a chute roughly a mile long that begins more than 3,000 feet above the pavement and has a documented habit of releasing multiple times during a single storm, sometimes as often as once an hour. In the 1980s, the state built a snow shed on this exact stretch. 180 to 200 feet of angled concrete roof designed to let avalanches crash harmlessly overhead while protecting anyone caught beneath it. It cost $2.7 million to build in 1985, and it covers less than 200 feet of a chute that runs for a full mile. Everything on either side of that shed remains completely exposed. That gap, small as it sounds against a mile of mountainside, has already cost lives more than once. And the stories behind those losses are the reason this road cannot be understood through statistics alone. On March 3rd, 1963, the Reverend Marvin Hudson made the drive he made most Sundays over Red Mountain Pass to preach at the Congregational Church in Silverton. His daughters, Amelia and Pauline, rode with him, as they often did. A storm had already dropped heavy snow that day, and the East Riverside Slide had already run once, sending debris across the highway before the Hudsons ever reached that stretch. As their car began sliding on the packed snow beneath that same slope, Reverend Hudson pulled over to put chains on his tires. A routine task he had likely performed on this mountain many times before. The slope above him did not wait for him to finish. The slide released a second time and swept the car and everyone inside it 1,000 feet down the mountainside. A roadside marker near that spot today reads simply that the family was swept to their deaths while he was answering the call of his pastorate in Silverton. In 1963, the only avalanche forecasters working this pass were the plow drivers themselves, judging danger from the cabs of their own trucks, with no formal science or dedicated forecasting service behind the decision to keep the road open on any given morning. The Hudson family's deaths were an early, painful warning that this informal system had a fatal blind spot. It would take almost 30 more years and one more tragedy before that warning was fully heeded by the state. That second tragedy came in the pre-dawn hours of March 5, 1992. Not 30 years after the Hudson family died on that same mountainside. A storm had settled heavily over the San Juans, and the East Riverside Slide was releasing roughly once every hour, sending tons of snow down onto the highway below in a rhythm the crew on duty had started to track by the clock. A 6-person Colorado Department of Transportation team was working to keep the pass open, sheltering under the snowshed between releases while trying to clear a separate avalanche, the West Riverside Slide, that had already trapped travelers coming from the Silverton side. 2 of those workers, Eddie Imel and Danny Jaramillo, went out from the shed to help stranded drivers when a tire chain on their plow snapped. While they stopped to repair it, the East Riverside Slide let go without warning, far outside its usual hourly rhythm. Both men were buried under snow that witnesses later described as packed hard as concrete. In the wreckage, they somehow found each other and managed to dig out a small pocket of trapped air. For the next several hours, Jaramillo tried to keep Imel from slipping into hypothermia in the dark, but eventually snow had packed into Imel's mouth, and he could no longer respond at all. With nothing left to do for his partner, Jaramillo turned to try to save himself. 18 hours after the slide came down, using a flashlight as a makeshift shovel, he dug straight up through 20 feet of snow and finally broke through to daylight and open air. Eddie Imel did not survive. He died of hypothermia in the debris beside where his partner had been digging. He was the third snowplow driver killed on that same 100 feet of highway in just over 2 decades. Hundreds of people attended his funeral in the small mountain community that had lost him. His death, more than any single event before it, forced Colorado to change how it managed this road, shifting avalanche decisions away from individual plow drivers acting alone and toward a formal radio-linked partnership with trained avalanche forecasters who now work this corridor every winter, in constant contact with the maintenance crews on the ground. Years later, during another historically dangerous avalanche season on this same pass, a DOT area maintenance supervisor named Vance Kelso would describe one especially brutal night of slides in blunt terms, saying that the conditions his crews faced were what he imagined hell must be like. He also noted that Emile's death had triggered a lasting culture shift among the plow crews on Red Mountain Pass, away from adrenaline and machismo and toward deliberate caution. A shift that arguably kept later crews alive during storms just as violent as the one that killed him. The mountain has claimed people outside of winter storms as well, and not everyone who has gone over the edge here has been buried under snow. In the summer of 2025, a driver lost control of a pickup truck on the north side of Red Mountain Pass and went off the highway, the vehicle falling roughly 300 feet toward the Uncompahgre River in the canyon below. Local rescue crews, the same volunteer team that has spent decades responding to slides and wrecks on this pass, lowered ropes down the canyon wall using a technical system built for exactly this kind of terrain, and brought the driver back up to the pavement. That person survived with only minor injuries, a genuine outlier on a road where falls of that distance usually end very differently. Rescuers noted at the time that it was already the third serious incident on that stretch within the year. Days later, the mountain did not offer the same mercy to the next people who went over its edge. At around 8 o'clock on the morning of Tuesday, August 5, 2025, a silver Honda Civic left the shoulder of Highway 550 near milepost 88, roughly 5 miles south of Ouray, on a stretch of exposed cliffside that experienced climbers in the area know informally as the waterfall. The car rolled approximately 320 feet down the mountainside before coming to rest upside down in Red Mountain Creek, at the bottom of a fall steep and remote enough that responders needed a complex rope-assisted operation just to reach the wreckage. Colorado State Patrol troopers arrived within minutes of the initial report. 2 adults riding in the front seat, 42-year-old Louis Michael and 79-year-old Leoba Valdez, both of New Mexico, were killed in the crash. A juvenile girl who had been riding in the vehicle was found alive in the wreckage and pulled out during the rescue, then airlifted to a hospital. Her condition afterward was not publicly released by authorities. Investigators opened a formal review into the cause, with toxicology results that typically take 6 to 8 weeks to return in cases like this. The highway closed in both directions while crews worked the recovery, the same kind of closure this road has forced dozens of times before. For reasons ranging from snow to rockfall to exactly this kind of departure from the roadway. That crash was not an isolated event on an otherwise quiet stretch of pavement. Colorado State Patrol data reviewed after the crash shows that between January 2020 and December 2024, this same 15-mile section south of Ouray recorded 53 separate crashes. Of those, 33 involved a vehicle leaving the roadway entirely, a category of accident this highway is especially prone to given its width and its complete absence of any barrier to catch a drifting car. 11 of those 53 crashes resulted in injuries. Before the August 2025 crash, only one of those 53 incidents in that 5-year window had been fatal. Look at that pattern closely, because it tells you something the avalanche statistics do not. The greatest danger on this highway in an ordinary year is not the snow overhead. It is the width of the lane beneath you, the absence of anything to catch a car that drifts 6 inches too far to the right, and a posted speed limit of 25 miles an hour that exists precisely because the margin for error here is measured in feet, not seconds. It is worth being precise about what that means in practice. On a road with a standard shoulder and a guardrail, a driver who drifts offline has a buffer, a few feet of gravel or turf, and then a barrier designed to redirect the vehicle back onto the pavement. On this stretch of US 550, that buffer often does not exist at all. The lane simply ends. The world drops away, and whatever happens next happens over hundreds of feet of open air rather than a few feet of shoulder. That is the mechanical reason a low-speed mistake here can produce the same outcome as a high-speed one somewhere else, and it is a large part of why this corridor has repeatedly been named among the most dangerous roads in North America by researchers and journalists who study exactly this kind of terrain. If you are finding this as unsettling as I did while researching it, that is exactly the kind of story this channel was built to tell. So if you have not already, this is the moment to subscribe and stay with us. Because we still have to talk about what this road looks like today, and whether anything has actually gotten safer since Otto Mears first blasted a shelf into this mountain 140 years ago. What ties these stories together, separated as they are by 6 decades, is not one single design flaw. It is the layering of several ordinary hazards into one unforgiving geometry. A narrow shelf blasted for wagons, never widened enough to leave real margin for modern vehicles. A near total absence of guardrails across the most exposed sections, kept deliberately open so plows can shove hundreds of inches of winter snow off the edge instead of trapping it against a rail. Grades and switchbacks steep enough that a driver going even a little too fast arrives at a blind curve with less room to correct than the road physically allows. And above it all, nearly 100 named avalanche paths that do not respect road closures, storm schedules, or how many years it has been since the last slide came down. Every fatal incident we have covered traces back to one or more of these same conditions working together. The Hudson family stopped directly beneath an active slide path because the road offered no safer place to fix their chains. Emil and Jaramillo were caught in the open because the shed covering their route was only 200 feet long on a mile-long chute. The Honda Civic carrying Louis Michael and Leoba Valdez left a roadway with no shoulder and no rail to catch it, on a curve locals had already nicknamed for exactly how it looks when something goes wrong there. The state has not ignored any of this, particularly on the avalanche side of the equation. In December of 2023, the Colorado Department of Transportation installed 5 remotely controlled avalanche mitigation systems directly on Red Mountain Pass, the first fixed systems of their kind ever placed on this specific highway. These units use compressed air and gas to trigger controlled concussive blasts at the top of high-risk slide paths, letting crews bring snow down deliberately on a closed road with no traffic present, rather than waiting for it to release unpredictably onto cars or plow drivers below. It is part of a larger statewide network that now monitors 522 avalanche paths above Colorado's highways, using explosives or gas-based systems to actively manage the risk in 278 of them, with Red Mountain Pass finally counted among the corridors receiving fixed, remotely triggered infrastructure rather than relying on hand-placed charges alone. The Colorado Avalanche Information Center now staffs this corridor with dedicated forecasters who stay in constant radio contact with DOT's maintenance crews on the ground. a direct answer to the informal plow driver-only judgment calls that failed the Hudson family in 1963, and ultimately cost Eddie Amell his life in 1992. Compiled figures on this stretch of highway still point to an average of roughly 7 deaths a year on Red Mountain Pass, a number that includes both roadway crashes and backcountry avalanche fatalities in the surrounding terrain, underscoring that better forecasting and remote mitigation have changed the shape of the risk here without ever fully eliminating it. The road also carries physical reminders of everyone it has lost, if you know where to look. Along the highway near the East Riverside Slide, 2 markers stand close together. One is dedicated to the Hudson family, describing how they were swept to their deaths while answering the call of a Sunday pastorate. The other honors, more broadly, everyone who has given what it calls the supreme sacrifice in the maintenance of Red Mountain Pass, a tribute written for the plow drivers, Eddie Amell among them, who have died keeping this corridor open for the rest of us. Most tourists never stop long enough to read either one. Today, the $1 Million Highway remains open essentially year-round, closing only temporarily for major storms. Active avalanche control operations, or crash recovery, exactly like the closures that followed both the 1992 avalanche and the 2025 Honda Civic crash. It carries daily traffic from tourists chasing the mountain views, commercial trucks moving freight between Durango and Montrose, and residents of Ouray and Silverton who genuinely have no other paved route between their own towns. The road remains narrower in places than a standard 2-lane highway anywhere else in the country, as tight as 23 feet across in spots and rarely wider than 48 feet even at its most generous. The posted speed limit through the most exposed sections stays at 25 miles an hour, not as a suggestion, but as a figure calculated from exactly how much room a driver realistically has to correct a mistake before that mistake becomes permanent. Locals who drive it regularly describe a simple, almost boring discipline as the only real defense. Slow down well before the curve, not during it. Keep both hands on the wheel through the switchbacks facing Ouray. And never, ever assume a guardrail will be there to catch you, because on most of this road, it will not be. We opened tonight with 23 feet of pavement and a missing guardrail, and I want to leave you back there, because that single fact explains almost everything this road has taken from the people who trusted it over the last 140 years. It was never built to be safe by modern standards. It was built to survive winter, to move ore, to connect 2 towns that had no other way to reach each other. And every compromise made in 1883 to accomplish that is still built into the asphalt you would drive on today. The mountain has not changed. The forecasting has gotten better, the mitigation systems more sophisticated, the rescue crews more experienced, but the shelf auto mirrors blasted into that cliff face is still exactly as wide as it was when horses pulled wagons across it. If you ever find yourself on Red Mountain Pass, slow down before you think you need to. Keep your eyes on the white line, and remember that the drop is real even when the road looks calm and the view looks safe to admire. If you have driven this highway yourself, or one like it, tell me where and when in the comments below. I want to know how close the edge really felt to you.